Hello everyone, today we're looking at Spec Ops: The Line. This is a very unique shooter for the very fact that it tries to take an anti-war statement. Maybe not something revolutionary or totally different, but the way they do it is a very distinct and interesting way. The first thing, that even though this is a shooter, it's a third-person shooter, and more interesting enough, you basically are a marine station in Dubai. And so basically you have, the heart of the desert that has basically been attacked, and the city has been thrown into total chaos. And so you have a choice to, basically what kind of marine you're going to be. And so for a lot of the time, you're kind of just thrown into these scenarios where you don't have control over what's going on. But there are certain scenarios where essentially you have to do certain things as a soldier, and sometimes you make the wrong call. And so Walker, even though he's trying to do the right thing, things end up not working out. And so for those of you who already know, this is a game based off the book Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now. And honestly, I think Apocalypse Now is like a absolute masterpiece of cinematography and movies, and this game does not really come close to what that movie accomplished, but it does come, it at least tries, so it's not terrible. There's some really cool set pieces in this game. You have one section with a helicopter and a giant chain gun that just mows down everything in sight. It's really cool. You have sandstorms, really distinct, interesting environments. This kind of extremely decadent society that has, been torn to ruin by these terrorists or whatnot. And it's really not super established who these bad guys are. They're just bad guys you need to fight. But the tone of the game is that the further that Walker and his squad goes into the heart of the enemy, the more insane and deranged and unhinged he becomes. And the more ways they screw up or fail in their mission, the more you're wondering what is actually real and not, and what's not. One of my favorite segments in this game is this whole thing where you have to go to this radio tower that's playing some hippie music or something, and you're basically have to consume drugs or something. And it has this very kind of surreal thing where it's almost like an MK Ultra moment where you're not sure if you're in control or the drugs are in control, or what the heck is even going on. This is also a pretty realistic, gruesome shooter. One thing I noticed is that sometimes when you pull off headshots, the guy's heads just actually explode, which is pretty unusual. So it's pretty graphic. You have a good array of different weapons, sub-weapons, like any other kind of shooter. And I think really this was a response and a commentary on shooters up until this point, because, ever since COD 4 came out, the whole war scenario, war cool, war good, violence good, and people were really somewhat concerned or thinking about, oh, what if all these violent video games are actually causing violence and are training people to become killers. And so this has an anti-war, I guess, feeling to it, and kind of questioning the culture and the content and what we're consuming. Another really cool thing that's kind of an Easter egg about this game is that, as you play the game, the main menu will change and progress. And so it starts off with an American flag overlooking the city, and then when you do the sniper mission, there's no sniper ammo and stuff, on the ground. And by the end of the game, the American flag is in shambles and totally tattered. And so, the basic or the major line from this game is do you feel like a hero now that you've killed all these people? And so it really challenges the player, do you feel you're justified in your actions, even if, do you consider yourself the good guy no matter what, just because you fight for what you believe is justice and what is right and what is wrong? And it gets so intense, as the game goes on, in terms of who's a terrorist, who's a marine, who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, that it just becomes this descent into insanity and madness. And it's reflected really interesting in Walker's mind. For example, the central tower, I think it's the Burj Khalifa or something, in the game kind of becomes this Tower of Sauron in his vision. And then they do this whole twist thing at the end where the things that Walker saw, where he thought he saw real people, were actually skeletons. And so it's kind of can you trust Walker as a narrator? Can you trust what he sees? And again, who is justified? And at the end of the day, whoever is alive is the only person who, has will and power because they're the only ones left standing, essentially. And again, the soundtrack really helps convey those kind of messages of these, shambling of Walker's mind and his squad. And so, as you go on, Walker gets more and more disheveled. He's dirty, he's bruised, he's got cuts on his face, he's wounded, and your squad also gets equally disheveled and messed up. So yeah, this is one of the shooters where the story is really the main focus of the game, which is kind of unusual, I guess, for a lot of these shooters, which is just like, oh, gun good. I thought even like Call of Duty had a decent story, but yeah, this is kind of a deconstructionist perspective of it. And there are some people who consider it to be very snobbish, very pretentious, very over the top. And be like, oh yeah, okay, we get it. There's this one scene in particular where they try to basically bomb the enemy, but instead they accidentally bomb civilians, and they almost think, oh, this has to be a trick or something. There's no way. We were like absolutely certain we were bombing insurgents and we didn't target civilians, and they kind of have to live with their mistake, and that's where the midpoint of the game kind of happens. And again, you don't have any input on what the actions that you take, but you just have to live with the regret and the fact that you've done this thing and just see Walker's struggle. So a lot of people like lampoon this game saying, oh, well, you don't actually make the choices, they're made for you, and then you have to live with the consequences of them. So it's kind of trying to say that, oh, you're making these choices and you're an awful person and you're bad, without actually giving you the agency to do so. But I think that kind of misses the point. The game is really about, what if you did make those choices to begin with and how you dealt with them. If you had the foresight to know that this thing would happen, would it really matter anyway? And if you did have the foresight, you could just choose not to do it. And so the game finally comes to this major climax at the very end, where you are confronted with your kind of Colonel Kurtz, where he says, soldier, you came here under your delusions and your pretenses. It's like, do you finally feel like a hero? And then the final kind of point of the game, that you finally get to make a choice by the end of the game, where you decide whether or not you're going to basically kill yourself or kill the other you, or the other version of yourself that is okay with the things you've done, or you wish to atone. And so the way the game ends is either Walker comes out and surrenders, or he comes out and fights essentially the last remnants of the U.S. Army, and becomes this rogue soldier that's absolutely gone totally AWOL and becomes like a rogue commando, essentially. And the final fight is basically just this survival horde wave mode, essentially. So yeah, Spec Ops, it tries to ask some really interesting philosophical questions while also being a really good shooter. I forgot one thing about this game is you also have this CQC system where you can go up to guys and basically do close quarters combat on them and do a bunch of melees and executions and stuff. And so it's a very competently well-made game. It's not like one of these fancy schmancy art walking simulators that's trying to just ask questions and be deconstructionist about violence in general. The game is very well made, and it just has a counter narrative thing that really makes you think. Either way, this is a very interesting game and a very philosophical game, and no one can say that, from this era of gaming, no one questioned what are the consequences of what we're doing, what we're exposing ourselves to. And at least in this scenario, they highlight that. And again, it's a very artistic shooter, I would say. One of the more interesting shooters out there, and I can definitely recommend it. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this game. I'll see you later.